Okay, this part of the lecture, I want to talk about a specific example that came out of some research, or a small research project that we threw together very quickly when COVID happened. So the research that I've been talking about so far in the hospitality industry that much of the content of the course is built on is this large, well-funded project that we did over a number of years. It started in 2019, and as you can imagine, in the thing on the hospo industry, COVID comes along and pretty much shuts it down. So what we did, we got a small amount of money then to do a quickly assembled project where we kind of jumped off the back of that project that we were doing, but paused it and did this separate project where we recruited some people in both Newcastle and Melbourne, some young people who were working in the hospo industry, but who had instantly lost their jobs, or the industry had shut down and they could no longer work and weren't making any money. So what we got them to do was get them to keep these kind of digital diaries for us for a month, kind of keep track of their experiences, post some photos about what they're up to and reflect on how it was affecting them. And then after that month period, we interviewed them. And this was within kind of the lockdown periods, the very long ones that were happening in Melbourne and the kind of shorter intermittent ones that were happening in Newcastle. But at the time, the hospitality industry was essentially shut, other than being, restaurants turning into small takeaways and all the kind of things that they did at the time. So within this cohort, from memory, I think we had 20 at each site at Melbourne and Newcastle. We had a really wide array of experiences. It was really interesting. And then again, relating this to class, a wide array of people with different economic circumstances. Many of the people that were more independent or didn't have families to help them were instantly struggling. They were instantly thrown into poverty, instantly couldn't afford food, instantly couldn't pay their rent. More privileged people that could had support or could move back with their parents often spoke about it how it was kind of a nice time. They could relax a little bit, work on themselves, get fit, do some yoga, go for walks, all this kind of stuff, and not have to lead this kind of overtly busy life that many young people lead, which is, study, work, socializing, all this kind of stuff. So there was a kind of marked difference between different people's experiences. Of course, what also happened is that the government announced various packages of support for businesses and also for individuals. But this was only available to Australian citizens. And what happened in this situation is that a particular cohort of international students that, many of which work in the hospitality industry, were instantly made precarious, instantly had no support, were instantly thrown into deep poverty and high-risk situations. So what I'm going to talk about here is one particular example, a kind of case study example of who we're calling Rosie. She was living in Melbourne, came to Spain on a working holiday, but then kind of decided that she wanted to study. And she'd done a degree and a master's, I think, and was completing that kind of stuff. She had 3 casual jobs at the time of COVID, and all of them instantly shut. So like the other international students, she had zero access to any support, none whatsoever. So she moved out of a larger apartment. I think she was sharing with one person into a smaller apartment, but like sharing with lots more people to kind of deal with that problem straight away. She also, and I'll talk about the details why in a minute, booked a flight home to Spain, but the flight was cancelled and then it took her ages to get a refund. So essentially she wiped out all of her savings very quickly. She then ate into what her, superannuation funds, they were opened up and allowed people to support themselves, and they were quickly used up just to kind of pay rent and eat. So instantly, Rosie's thrown into this horribly precarious position. At the time, too, you may remember that the Prime Minister, essentially, when asked about was there any support for international students and people on international visas, he basically said that they should go home, which was an absurd thing to say, basically because, also the international airline system had closed down as well, pretty much. But it's a really good example, I think, of the different treatment of different cohorts straight away. So this was a kind of profoundly affecting experience for many international students in our cohort. They reflected on this as a kind of overt experience of symbolic violence here. She's lost all her work and the Prime Minister says, go home. I don't have any help here. She says to herself, why do I stay in a country where I'm not worth it? They don't want me. My family wants me to, so she tries to get home and then obviously can't because of the industry, the airline's being shut down as well. So then she spends weeks trying to find any work that she can get on Seek, on Gumtree, all these places, online classifieds. She applies for cleaning jobs. She's really kind of emotional about what's going on here. And I'm going to tell a story a little bit about like her, in essence, taking, major kind of personal risks to actually kind of get work to be able to live. So she finds a cleaning job, but it was weird. She instantly gets a bad vibe off this guy that was employing her. The guy calls. He seems really weird on the phone, but she has nothing else at the moment. The guy calls me and said, "Can you come right now to do this cleaning job? He'll pay for an Uber for you to get there." She's talking to her friend and said, "Oh, she tells her friend basically, this is the address. If I don't get back to you in 15 minutes, call the police." She's viscerally affected here. She feels there's the risk kind of taking this job. She doesn't trust this person, through this kind of unofficial, informal lines to get this job. But she has to do something to be able to live. So then the Uber thing's retracted and she's asked to take a train to meet him in this other property. So she follows the directions. And again, she tells the story here. It's a long way away. She has to go to walking to different stations and, get different trains. She doesn't have anything in her life. I don't have a job. I have to work, I have to do, you have to when you don't have anything. She gets to the station. This dude picks her up, gets in the car. It's dirty. It's full of old McDonald's. Car's full of garbage. As she said, there was shit everywhere and it reeked of ketchup and coffee and garbage and it was bad. And the guy was like, he had khaki pants and he had no underwear on. He's old and fat. He's missing teeth, no hair. There's a stain in the middle of his pants. He didn't clean himself. He's cleaning house. I was cleaning houses for him and I was like, she's saying to herself here, what are you doing? You're finishing your second degree, 4 languages, and you're here cleaning with this fucking weirdo. It was so bad, maybe I'm a little bit of a princess, but no. She's like being reflexive there. Like she's not like overtly being a princess. This is a kind of ugly situation for her. Now you can see the kind of class market she's using here. She's being employed here by a guy that looks to be in relative poverty. But, the gendered risk going on here, she's being isolated. She's out in the middle of nowhere and she doesn't feel safe. So she's cleaning away and then her hands start to hurt. And then she's kind of told that the product they're using is kind of toxic. And he didn't tell her that. And she's got cuts on her hand. It gets in there. She's starting to sting. And like another girl there tells her to be careful with it, and she's like, "Oh, you're fucking kidding me. No one told me that. It was bad. It was so crazy." So she left. She takes off. She's out of there. She gets paid for the shift. Then later at night, this guy's texting her. She feels creepy about that, but it was the only option she had. So this is a kind of highly risky visceral experience for Rosie. And from a kind of an analytical point of view in terms of the class relations we're talking about here, this is complex, right? Because in many ways, Rosie's doing the right things as a kind of young woman in the kind of global world. She's gone overseas. She's earned kind of mobility capital, and she's earning all these degrees. She's highly educated. She's nearly finished a second degree. So really, in terms of her, I suppose, original class position from Spain and going overseas, she's relatively middle class and doing all the right things in youth transitions. But then, this kind of pandemic happens, no support. She's instantly thrown kind of down the class system, I suppose, to being, in a massively precarious situation, not just economically, but then having to take these risks to get work to be able to live. So physically as well. So the class situation here on a global scale is really interesting in the sense that the government just decides not to, treat international students as humans. Makes kind of technical differentiations between citizens and non-citizens, even though they're out here legitimately working and studying and have no place to go and nowhere to get home. And the kind of rugs pulled under her feet, I suppose, in terms of the way that she thinks about herself. So she wasn't able to find any other work at that point. What she ends up doing is participating in paid drug trials. When she was interviewed, she was actually in the hospital, being injected and like talking on the phone to us, and telling her about it. I didn't really want to do it, like test drugs. They took blood here all the time, but it's good money. I have to study. And I was thinking, I'm home all the time. Why not do the same study here while she's doing the drug trial? Only give them blood, pay me by the hour, and then they give you food. You feel a little bit more relaxed, less stress. I wasn't receiving any money to be at home. Now, this seems like a kind of, I suppose, extreme situation, but it's just not. Like those international students at the time that didn't have support, that couldn't get money from home as well. Rosie, in another part of the interview, talked about how the parents back in Spain had also lost work in the pandemic and were struggling to kind of look after themselves back there. So this is kind of a common story that was happening around the international students. What was also happening is that they were trying to find networks around them to help them out as well. So, for instance, like a Sri Lankan student would talk about like going on Facebook and finding local Sri Lankan groups and, you know, getting some food off them, tin food and stuff like that. There started to be this informal support networks that built up in the pandemic for people like this. But it certainly didn't come from the government. It didn't come from the universities, although some universities tried to do that in Melbourne. Mostly it was through these informal community means, if at all. So in terms of the kind of class relations I'm talking about, it's more complex here. It's not just kind of straightforward economic relation, and it's not even really straightforward cultural and symbolic relations. There's issues of mobility and globalization, and certainly race. I think international students were basically treated, you know, in an overtly racist way by the government. They were just kind of jettisoned out because what was going on at the time politically, I think, was the idea that like most Australians wouldn't care too much about this and the way to save money, and generally a kind of, I think, a good indication of a way that immigrants and migrants are treated in Australia generally. Rosie's story kind of shows how these intersectional inequalities kind of basically affected her life instantly. So she was doing really well, but all of a sudden this instant change happens and she's kind of thrown to risk. No support network, deliberate government neglect just leaves her open instantly to a wide array of risks, economically, physically, in terms of mental health as well. So as I said, she's making all the right choices before the pandemic, overseas, gaining qualifications, connections, making networks, getting experiences, all this stuff that you need to be what Anita Harris in her kind of very important new studies book called The Can-Do Girl. But as soon as the pandemic hits, all this disappears and she's left to fend for herself. There's no safety net. She instantly becomes precarious, you know, not even kind of working class in the sense that there's no work for her to get. So she becomes instantly at that point what Harris called the at-risk girl. So there's kind of complexity at play with class positions here that I think situations like this, when you're bringing issues of gender and race and mobility to class, makes the picture a little bit more complex, and I suppose shows how globalization has affected class structures both within nations and between them. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks.